In a world where faith was tested by fire, where truth demanded sacrifice and faith was the only shield, and courage meant standing firm in the face of death. This is the story of those who refused to bow, the martyrs, the witnesses, the faithful. Welcome to Orthodox Martyrs TV, where history is not forgotten and faith still speaks. Our history is our strength.
As the great campaigns across the land of Canaan began to slow and the major military resistance had been largely subdued, the focus of Israel's journey shifted from conquest to settlement, from warfare to inheritance, and from movement to permanence. The land that had once been a distant promise was now a reality before them, yet what remained was perhaps just as important as the battles that had been fought, because the land now had to be divided, organized, and established among the tribes of Israel in a way that reflected both fairness and divine instruction. Under the leadership of Joshua, the people gathered as the distribution of the land began, a process that was not driven by personal ambition or tribal power, but guided by careful instruction. The tribes of Israel, descendants of the 12 sons of Jacob, each received their inheritance according to their identity and purpose. This division of land was not simply administrative, but deeply symbolic, because it represented the fulfillment of a promise made generations earlier. Cities, territories, valleys, and regions were assigned, and boundaries were established, shaping the future structure of the nation. Among these arrangements were also special provisions, including cities of refuge, designed to provide protection. There were also cities designated for the Levites, the tribe set apart for religious duties, ensuring that spiritual leadership remained distributed. As this process continued, Joshua grew older, and the weight of years began to reflect in both his leadership and his awareness of time. He had begun his journey as a servant under Moses, had witnessed the wilderness years, and had led battles across the land. Now he stood at the end of his role, aware that his time as leader was drawing to a close. Recognizing this, Joshua gathered the leaders of Israel together for a final address, a moment that carried the emotional weight of a generation. He reminded them of everything they had experienced, from the crossing of the Jordan River to the fall of Jericho, emphasizing that none of these events had happened by human strength alone, but through guidance and faithfulness to the covenant. He urged them to remain faithful, warning them not to turn away from the instructions they had been given. He made it clear that their future stability would depend not on past victories, but on continued faithfulness. In one of the most defining moments of his farewell, Joshua gathered all the tribes and presented them with a choice. He challenged them to decide whom they would serve, whether the God who had brought them out of Egypt or other influences. Joshua himself declared his own position with clarity and finality. "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." The people responded with affirmation, acknowledging the guidance they had received and the history they had experienced. A renewal of commitment was made and a formal agreement was established, marking the closing of one era and the beginning of another. Shortly after these events, Joshua's life came to its conclusion. According to the record, he died at the age of 110. He was buried in the territory he had been given within the land he had helped to secure. His burial marked the end of an era, but also the completion of a journey that had begun in servitude and ended in leadership. The legacy of Joshua rested in the transformation of a people who had moved from slavery to freedom and from wandering to settlement. Even after his death, the memory of his leadership remained in the identity of a nation that now stood rooted in the land. The story of Joshua was a story of fulfillment, transition, and faithfulness, marking the moment when promise became reality. And with that, the journey of Joshua came to an end. But the story of Israel was only just beginning. As the people of Israel continued their campaign in the land of Canaan, the events that followed the fall of Ai marked the beginning of a far larger and more intense phase of conflict, where multiple kingdoms began to respond with alliance and coordinated resistance. The news of Israel's victories had spread across the region, and what had once been individual city-states now began to form coalitions. Under the leadership of Joshua, the Israelites were now entering a stage where battles were no longer isolated events, but part of a broader struggle. One of the most significant developments came when several kings of the southern region formed an alliance after hearing about the treaty with Gibeon. Gibeon itself had entered into a peace agreement with Israel after its leaders had deceived Joshua by pretending to come from a distant land. Although the deception was later discovered, Joshua honored the oath that had been made, allowing Gibeon to remain as servants. When the coalition of Amorite kings decided to punish Gibeon for its alliance, they launched an attack, forcing an urgent plea to Joshua. In response, Joshua did not hesitate, recognizing that the treaty obligated him to defend them as part of a larger unfolding of events. The Israelites marched through the night, covering a significant distance in order to reach Gibeon in time, demonstrating both urgency and commitment. When they arrived, the battle quickly shifted, as the sudden arrival of Israel disrupted the attacking coalition, causing confusion and disorganization. As the enemies retreated, the pursuit extended beyond a single location, moving through valleys and mountain passes as Israel pressed forward. As the day was drawing toward its end, Joshua recognized that darkness would soon limit their ability to fully secure victory. In that critical moment, he called out in a declaration, calling for the sun to stand still over Gibeon and the moon over Aijalon. According to the account, the progression of daylight was extended, allowing the battle to continue without the limitation of nightfall. Whether understood as a literal alteration or a theological expression, the significance lies in time itself being aligned with the conflict's outcome. With the extended daylight, the Israelites were able to continue their pursuit, pressing the advantage and preventing the escape of coalition forces. The coalition kings attempted to flee and sought refuge in a cave at Makkedah, believing they could hide until the danger had passed. However, their location was discovered, and Joshua ordered the entrance of the cave to be sealed temporarily while the campaign continued. Once the surrounding forces had been dealt with, the kings were brought out, and their defeat was made public as a symbolic conclusion. Following this central victory, Joshua and the Israelites continued through the southern cities, securing victories that expanded their control. From there, attention shifted toward the northern regions, where yet another coalition of kings began to form near the waters of Merom. Through a combination of strategy and decisive action, Israel launched a surprise attack that prevented the coalition from fully organizing. The result was another series of victories that extended Israel's influence further across the land, fulfilling the gradual process of conquest. As the battle subsided, attention began to shift toward the division of the land and the final shaping of a nation. But the story was not yet finished, because what came next would determine how the promise would be lived, not just how it was won. The defeat at Ai marked a turning point that none of the people of Israel had expected. because after the overwhelming victory at Jericho, confidence had begun to rise among the ranks, and there was a growing sense that the land would fall. Yet what happened at Ai shattered that assumption in a single moment, forcing leaders to confront a reality more complex than military strength alone. Under the leadership of Joshua, the Israelites had advanced toward Ai with a sense of certainty, believing the smaller city meant an easier victory. Scouts had returned with reports suggesting that only a small portion of the army was needed, expecting a swift and uncomplicated success. However, as the battle began, the situation unfolded in a completely unexpected direction. The men of Ai responded with strength and coordination that forced the Israelites into sudden withdrawal. What had been assumed to be a minor engagement quickly turned into a retreat that left the people shaken, confused, and deeply unsettled. When news reached Joshua, he responded not with anger, but with deep distress, tearing his garments and falling before God in mourning. His prayer was a desperate attempt to understand why the promise that had guided them thus far seemed, in this moment, to have withdrawn. He spoke of the fear that this defeat would embolden their enemies, and that the reputation of Israel would be damaged among surrounding nations. Yet in response, what was revealed to him was not external opposition, but internal disobedience hidden within the camp. The problem was something taken from Jericho in violation of a direct command that everything in the city was to be devoted and set apart. Among the people was a man named Achan, who had secretly taken items including valuable objects that had been forbidden. What appeared to be a private decision had become a collective problem, affecting the entire nation. The process of uncovering the truth was gradual, as the tribes of Israel were brought forward one by one, narrowing the focus. Eventually, the responsibility fell upon Achan, who stood before Joshua and the people, and confessed to what he had done. The items were recovered from where they had been hidden, confirming the truth of his confession. The issue was about trust, obedience, and the integrity of the covenant that had guided them from the beginning. The consequences were carried out, restoring clarity to the community, though not without difficulty or emotional weight. It became clear that hidden actions could have visible consequences, and unity depended on collective responsibility. With this issue addressed, Joshua once again received direction, and the focus shifted back to Ai. Instead of a direct attack, a strategy was formed involving both visible movement and hidden positioning. Joshua organized the forces so a portion would approach openly, while another group was positioned in secrecy behind the city. As the main force advanced toward Ai, the men of the city responded as they had before, confident in their ability to repel the attack. They moved out of the city gates to engage the approaching Israelites, believing once again that they would secure an easy victory. However, this confidence led them away. At the appointed moment, the signal was given, and the concealed forces entered the city, setting it on fire and cutting off any possibility of return. When the men of Ai realized what had happened, they found themselves trapped between two fronts. What followed was a decisive victory for Israel, but one that came only after correction and renewed alignment. The lesson had been learned through failure, but it had now been reinforced through restoration. Following the victory, Joshua led the people to Mount Ebal, where an altar was constructed and sacrifices were offered. The law was written clearly on stones, reminding them that their future would be shaped by their choices. The tribes were divided between two mountains, creating a powerful visual representation of responsibility and unity. Joshua stood among them, aware that the land was not fully taken, but the foundation for their future was shaped by lessons learned. The land would not simply be given, but it would be held through obedience, unity, and constant awareness of the covenant. After crossing the Jordan River and stepping onto the land that had been promised to their ancestors, the people of Israel stood at a new reality. The wilderness was now behind them, and before them stood a land occupied by fortified cities and people aware that something powerful was approaching. At the forefront stood Jericho, a city known for its strength and massive walls, rising high as a barrier to the fulfillment of their promise. Under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites approached, but the instructions Joshua received were not conventional. There would be no siege or direct assault. Instead, the strategy required patience and complete obedience. A procession was organized, armed men, then priests carrying the sacred Ark of the Covenant. Priests sounded silver shofars as they moved. Behind them, the rest of the people followed, forming a silent and deliberate movement around the city. They were told to march around Jericho once each day for 6 days without shouting or speaking. This instruction must have seemed confusing and frustrating. On the first day, they rose early and walked in silence, the only sound being steady footsteps and the distant echo of trumpets. From the walls above, the inhabitants of Jericho watched, trying to understand what they were witnessing, perhaps expecting an attack that never came. On the second day, the pattern repeated, and then the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Each day, the repetition built towards something unseen. Inside the city, fear was growing. Among the people of Jericho was a woman named Rahab, whose perspective would become significant. Rahab had heard about the God of Israel and recognized that something greater was at work. She made a decision that would change her life. When Israelite spies entered the city, Rahab provided them shelter, hiding them from the king's men with great courage. She was given a sign, a scarlet cord, to be placed in her window, marking her household to be spared when the time came. As the seventh day approached, the people rose at dawn. This time, instead of circling once, they marched around the city 7 times. When the 7th march was completed, Joshua gave the command. The priests sounded their trumpets, and the people broke their long silence with a unified shout. The walls of Jericho collapsed suddenly, opening the city before them and removing the barrier that had seemed impossible to overcome. The Israelites moved forward, and Jericho was taken. Yet one house remained standing, the one marked by the scarlet cord. Rahab and her family were brought out safely, their lives preserved because of the choice she had made in faith. A clear instruction was given that everything within the city was to be devoted and not taken for personal gain, acknowledging the victory belonged to God. Confidence was rising, and the people looked toward their next objective, the city of Ai, a much smaller and less fortified place. But hidden among them was a man named Achan, who had taken forbidden items from Jericho, keeping them for himself in secret. When the Israelites went up against Ai, expecting a quick victory, they were instead met with resistance that they had not anticipated. The Israelites were forced to retreat, suffering losses that shook their confidence and raised questions that could not be ignored. The contrast was striking. One city had fallen without a fight, while the other, far smaller, had driven them back in defeat. As the people returned, the weight of disappointment settled over them. Joshua himself was deeply affected by what had taken place. The victory that had seemed certain was now replaced with uncertainty, and the realization grew that something deeper was at work. What began as a story of triumph was now a lesson. The greatest obstacles were not always walls, but the hidden choices within. Until those choices were faced, the path forward would remain uncertain. The journey of faith required more than just physical strength. The story of Joshua begins at a moment of transition, when one era had ended and another was about to begin. The great leader, Moses, was gone, and with his passing, the responsibility of leading the people of Israel now rested on Joshua. For years, Joshua had lived in the shadow of Moses, serving faithfully, learning quietly, and observing what it meant to guide a nation. Now, that responsibility was his alone. The people stood on the edge of the promised land, a land they had heard about for generations, described as abundant and rich. Yet it was filled with powerful nations and fortified cities. Before them flowed the Jordan River, not calm and shallow, but swollen. It overflowed its banks. It was both a physical barrier and a symbol of everything that stood between them and their destiny. In this moment, God spoke directly to Joshua, commanding him to be strong and courageous, not to be afraid. These words were repeated with emphasis, as if to prepare Joshua for the weight he would carry. Success would not come from strength alone, but from obedience, from remaining faithful to the law given through Moses. Joshua then turned to the people and began to prepare them. He instructed them to consecrate themselves, because they were about to witness something extraordinary. The priests were commanded to carry the Ark of the Covenant and to walk ahead of the nation toward the river. The instructions were clear, yet they required faith, because the miracle would not happen before they stepped forward. As the priests approached the edge of the Jordan, the waters continued to rush, powerful and unyielding. But the moment their feet touched the river, everything changed. The flow of water was cut off, and the river stood still, piling up at a distance, leaving dry ground where moments before there had been a raging current. One by one, tribe by tribe, the people of Israel crossed the riverbed on dry ground. It was not only a miracle, but a confirmation that the same God who delivered them from Egypt was now leading them. Joshua gave a command to preserve this moment. 12 men were chosen to take stones from the middle of the river. And these stones were to be set up as a memorial, so that when future generations asked, the story would be told again. When the nation had crossed, the priests finally stepped out, and the waters returned to their place. Israel now stood on the soil of the promised land, but this was only the beginning. Before them stood cities, armies, and challenges unlike anything they had faced before. Yet something had changed. This was no longer a wandering people, uncertain and divided. They were a nation that had seen the power of God move on their behalf, standing at the threshold of fulfillment. As they camped at Gilgal, Joshua took time to prepare the people spiritually, reminding them of their identity. It was during this time that Joshua experienced a moment that would define everything that followed. As he looked toward Jericho, he encountered a mysterious figure, a man standing before him with a drawn sword. Joshua approached him and asked whether he was for Israel or for their enemies. The man declared that he was neither, but the commander of the army of the Lord. In that moment, Joshua realized that this battle and everything that would follow was not ultimately his to control. He fell to the ground in reverence, understanding that he was stepping into something far greater than himself. He was instructed to remove his sandals, because the place where he stood was holy. The land lay before them, the promise was within reach, and the next step would require complete obedience. And beyond the horizon, the walls of Jericho stood waiting,